Humans and technology. Right on display. Can you hear me now? One more time. You're like undergraduates. Can you hear me now? Yes, very good. Thank you. Good morning. My name is Jussaume. And first of all, I want to thank the National Academy of Sciences for hosting this, and especially those wonderful people in the not quite the back row, but sitting behind all the computers who've already been quite patient with me today as I've prepared my presentation. And without those kind of folks behind us, we can never get anything done. Secondly, I want to thank all of you, of course, for coming, but in particular, I want to thank the members of the organizing committee that I've been working with for so many years, it seems like, and in particular for the trust they've placed in me, because I'm sure they're still a little bit nervous about putting a sociologist up here to talk to you all about weed management. And of course, their nervousness is not without some justification, because this is the first time they've seen the revised title to the presentation, okay, which happened at 7 o'clock yesterday morning, and only Dave Irvin knows about, or at least up until now. But it was actually a really big change that I made yesterday morning. And it's that word in parentheses. And it actually reflects on what David Shaw has been talking to you about already today. And actually was really important for me because during this whole process of writing this report with Dave Irvin, my colleague Dave Irvin, with whom I've been working now for how many years, David? I don't know. Many. The whole time, I was feeling uncomfortable with what we were writing. And it was a strange feeling because most of what we were writing, I was comfortable with. But there was this kind of, something was wrong. And I'm sure David felt it through all of my email messages. And I couldn't put my finger on it until yesterday morning at 7 o'clock when I was going over the talk with my slice of bread and cup of coffee. And what I began to realize, today we're going to be presenting a model to you. I began to realize there's another model that's been used quite a bit over the past 60 years to talk about farmer decision making that many of you are probably familiar with. It's called innovation of diffusions, right? How many of you have heard of that? Several, okay. Innovation of diffusions. It's a very old model. It's also been applied in many other fields outside of agriculture. For example, the use of medical technology, or the development and dispersal of medical technology. But when used especially in agriculture, it tends to put all of the onus on the farmer. Okay? And you hear this kind of language all the time nowadays. What can we do to get the farmer to do the right thing? What can we do to get the farmer to listen to the scientists? Okay? Even though sometimes, where's Mike Owen? Sometimes scientists are wrong, Mike. And sometimes we discover that the farmers who didn't listen to the scientists do better, okay? In many ways, in terms of taking care of their land, for example. But it puts all of the onus on the farmer. Now, certainly the farmer is the one who's taking most of the risk. And we need to accept that, we need to recognize that, we need to make that very important. But, as David was pointing out, what we're saying here today and what the social sciences are trying to say I was teaching last night at 6 o'clock. What the social scientists are trying to say to you all and to many other people is that many of the problems we're facing require multiple actors, require dynamism, require a new approach to thinking about not only the problems, but how we respond to them. And the best way for me to capture that is with this word holistic. And that's what I'm going to try to not convince you of, but try to get you to grapple with today. Okay, may I have the next, oh, cool.
Forward, backward, and a supporter.
And a pointer, wow, neato. Okay, today's take-home points. I always begin with what's the key message, right? Many of you are like me. We were taught, tell people what you're going to tell them, then tell them, and then tell them again, right? Okay, today's take-home points. Number one, there is no single solution to the problem of herbicide-resistant weeds that can be placed in the hands of individual farmers. Or to use a phrase that David likes to talk about, herbicide-resistant management is a wicked problem, okay? A wicked problem. How many of you are familiar with the term wicked problem? Several? Wicked problem. Now, the notion of wicked problems, or the terminology wicked problems, actually began about 40 years ago amongst planning scientists, planners, those people who try to design or help people manage, for example, cities. Because 40 years ago, I mean, think about it. You have this city that runs pretty well. And think of all the systems you have in the city, right? You have a water system, right? You have a sewerage system, right? And at 11 o'clock, we're all going to want to go out and utilize the sewerage system. You have transportation systems, you have police systems, and each of those systems in itself is complex. And then you have to bring them all together and get them to work. Okay? It involves multiple actors who are acting in a dynamic fashion with their environment and adapting to ever-changing situations. These are wicked problems. And what I'm going to suggest to you is that the problems have always been wicked. It's just that our understanding of them hasn't been. So you need to become wicked thinkers, okay? Wicked thinkers. Next. So that means, what is the implication? The responses, as David suggested, will have to be complex, varied, community-based, and with roles of various actors. And this will be a never-ending process of learning and adaptation. It'll be dynamic. You'll never have the answer. You'll never, and we're not just talking about weed management. Since I'm a good department chair, I have to talk about some of my colleagues, right? I mean, I have two colleagues in my department, sociologists, Dr. Diana Stewart, Dr. Sandy Marquardt-Pyatt, who are now working on an interdisciplinary team funded by the National Science Foundation to look at the issue of nitrogen management in agriculture, which is a wicked problem in terms of the nitrogen flowing into Lake Erie and helping to contribute to algae blooms, which means the people in Cleveland can't use their drinking water. That's a wicked problem. Okay? And there are countless wicked problems. Indeed, we should probably say that all problems are wicked, so let's think of them that way. Next. So, yes, now we get to the clicker portion of our, or one of the clicker portions of our presentation. And David and I have this question we want you to respond to. You only are allowed to answer to one, so I'll go through it and just click the number that you like. What single factor do you think exerts the greatest influence on farmers' herbicide resistance management decisions? 1, economic conditions. 2, extent of the problem. 3, available technology. 4, natural resource conditions. 5, personal values. 6, neighbors, communities. 7, government programs. 8, other. And we got 8 seconds left for you to finish. Okay, and let's see what you all think. We're disappointed, aren't we, David? Economic conditions, extent of the problem, available technology, natural resource, personal values, government has nothing to do with it. No influence. That must make the undersecretary feel really good. Okay. I want somebody to raise their hand who put in personal values. Come on, don't be bashful. If I could run up the aisles, I would. Yes, I'll repeat it after you say it. Give me an example. Why do you think personal values?
It encompasses, well, economics is pretty close to it, but economics involves a whole, that was one between the two. The personal values sort of incorporates everything.
Personal values incorporates anything. Do you have a specific example? What kind of value?
When you say economic conditions, if you just said economics, I would have said yes.
Oh, okay, okay.
It's not external, it's your personal view of how you approach your economics.
Okay, your personal view of how you approach your good, okay, I'll take that. Good. How about neighbors' community? Come on, don't be, somebody answered. Peer pressure. Very good. I do think that's very important. That's the kind of thing we sociologists like to study, is peer pressure. Available technology. Come on, boy, you guys, my students are much more engaged than you. I notice you also don't sit in the front just like they do. What?
Well, if you don't have the type of sprayer you want to put there to use in a particular application to reduce drift, then they couldn't adapt.
Right, you don't have the sprayer, or you don't even have we didn't put financial resources, you don't have the resources available to buy the sprayer, right? That could be a factor too. Okay, we're not even going to talk about economic conditions. And of course, because this is a wicked problem, the real answer is your favorite answer from your SAT and GRE exams. Oops, I got to go back. It's not stopping. What's going on here? There you go. All of the above. All of the above. Yeah, she had said it, huh? All of the above. They all matter. And by the way, since David talked about technology, I think I'm going to digress just for a minute into technology, because we do have this field in sociology called science and technology studies. And it's not just sociology, it's the social sciences. And one of the important things about technology to point out is technology does not exist outside of human systems. I mean, people create technologies. People make choices about technologies. People use or fail to use technologies. Technologies are a human creation. They're not given to us by some alien being. Okay? We make them. So to think of technology, even this model, so I'm already pointing out to you the imperfection of the model, to think of technology as somehow separate from economics or policy or education or especially human capital or other social influences, personal values, is silly. Because all of those things go into technology as well as into science. Okay? I always get a big kick when I hear people talk about we want to have the best science, and of course I believe that too. I mean I work in a higher education institution, but science is culture bound. Science is history bound. Okay? Science is not neutral. It can't be because we created it. Does that make sense? If you want, we can talk about that later. Okay? But anyway, this is the model that we've come up with and that I've always been nervous about presenting, because I'm always nervous about presenting models to people, because then someone is going to come back and say, Ray, you gave us the model. But there is no such thing as the model. It's like a mathematical equation. And one thing I love to do with my students, and we should have put this slide up there, is ask them, how much is 1 plus 1? Who has the answer? What's the answer? 1 plus 1? 2? Any? 11? Actually, if it were Boolean algebra, which is the algebra that see? kids call it when you butt dial, yeah, okay. So, no, I got to recapture my train of thought. But, 1 + 1 in Boolean algebra, which is the basis of the computer revolution, is 1. Right? Look it up. You can get a master's degree in Boolean algebra. You get a PhD by studying Boolean algebra. Mathematics is just a way of looking at the world. And when you start taking that way of looking at the world and assuming it to be real, we call that reification. And that's one of the biggest problems in the world today. We take models and we reify them. So this model doesn't exist, but it's meant to, as a guide for us as social scientists, for you as in whatever field you are, to look at the world and begin to understand it. But it's just a model. But it's a model that points to you, especially for us, to a lot of the human dimensions that can influence weed management decision making. Okay? The influences of community, the influences of firms, the influences of government, and not just policy, but government actors. Okay? The influences, we put everything in the economics box, but you know, we could do whatever. But does this make sense? And so even to think that, you know, in this model we say, okay, we begin with the perceived weed management problem. We think that's a good way to start, especially for this group, because we've been told that one of the big issues is we really don't yet have a shared sense that this is a major problem. That's great. But you could easily start with personal motivations and values. Okay? But all of these factors contribute. And as you look through them and think about them, I hope you can begin to appreciate that. So let's give you a few examples. Well, first of all, some implications. So weed management is a complex problem pervaded by uncertainty. 2, the biophysical, the technological, the economic, the social factors, all the factors Dave Shaw talked to you about, all interact to affect the decision-making process. And not just at the farm level, at all the other levels, like in Amy's office. Weed scientists, social scientists, policymakers, private sector actors must work with farmers to understand the process and to develop approaches to address the issue. So it's not just about getting the farmers to do something right, it's about each and every one of us doing what makes sense to address the issue. So examples. These are examples of research on a variety of areas just to try to get you to think more about the issue. And David Irvin can answer some of the questions because some of these are his examples. 1, Missouri farmers with higher education levels implemented more soil conservation practices in a place he studied, okay? Now, I'm here to tell David, I'm sure, and he would agree, that there are other cases where actually high education levels inhibited the use of a certain kind of practice. Or not inhibited, I shouldn't say inhibited, were associated with lack of adoption. Okay? Just because it happens in one case doesn't mean it will happen in all cases. But the model tells us, yes, we need to look at education levels and how they're related to the adoption of certain practices. Okay? Next, government cost sharing, increased soil conservation efforts. Okay? And I love it when people, you know, David will use the R word. You know, a lot of people in agriculture like to, and not just agriculture, in our culture, like to think of regulation as this terrible thing. It's interesting, in other cultures, they don't necessarily think that. And yet each and every one of you can, I'm sure, identify cases where regulation worked or was necessary. As a matter of fact, without regulations, we couldn't survive. Think of, how would business work without contracts and contract enforcement? Wouldn't work, okay? But under what conditions does it work? Under what conditions does it not work? What's the best approach? Okay? Farmers' values, we talked about values, about downstream neighbors, influence their pollution control decisions. People actually think at a community level. If I do something, how's it going to affect my neighbor? It does matter to people. And this is one that I'm most familiar with. This was a study of the innovation and diffusion of sustainable ag practices in Kentucky. And they started to parcel out the different aspects of the decision-making process, because they recognized making decisions, it wasn't just a single decision. So when it came to identifying the problem that they needed to address with sustainable agricultural practices, the farmers didn't rely on the experts. I mean, what did the experts know? They weren't there. They relied on other farmers in their neighborhood drinking coffee at the local whatever coffee shop and said, geez, I got this Palmer amaranth weed I can't get rid of in my field. I mean, like that. But when it came to trying to understand some possible solutions, yes, they went to the experts. In other words, they have a very complex, sophisticated decision-making process that differentiates between different elements of that process. That's natural. I mean, you all do it in your lives. And that's what a wicked problem, or understanding this as a wicked problem, means. Farm-level issues. So, and part of the wicked problem nature is that how these factors interact will probably vary, will likely vary. David talked about all the different commodities and all the different types of weeds and all the different types of resistance. And so part of the solution is going to have to be to understand in the particular context and then what needs to be done. And there's not going to be one single best management practice, okay? But different factors, ecology, climate, weed types, etc., affect weed resistance and thus the weed management approaches. 2, various household level factors. So being able to avoid the sprayer or not, knowledge, personal values will influence weed management practices. Various community level factors, this farm structure, how much land is owned or rented, retail environment, level of social capital will influence the degree to which community-based responses are possible. Okay? All right, so a wicked problem. What we have is a wicked problem. The evolution of herbicide resistance is a wicked problem because of its complexity and because there is no optimal solution. Managing resistance involves or will involve managing a common pool resource because the susceptibility of weeds to a management strategy is a shared resource in an area. Although I'm sure, and I'm not the weed scientist, I'll defer to Mike and Dave and others, but I bet you the degree to which it's a shared resource problem probably varies according to the nature of the weed and so on. That would be my guess, based on the theory of what a wicked problem looks like. No model can completely describe the evolution of herbicide resistance. And decision-making models are frameworks for understanding how people are responding to a problem and for trying to map out a solution, but it's not a specific solution, right? What wicked model problems thinking teaches us is there's no silver bullet. As a matter of fact, that's been part of our ideological hang-up, and not just in agriculture, everywhere. We want the single solution so we can just buy it and use it and then go watch more football, right? Instead of understanding the problem, like Social Security. My dad is an accountant. He said, what we really need is a day-long, TV show just with accountants talking about Social Security. But people don't want to watch that. They want to watch more football, right? Okay. Towards a holistic decision-making framework, the problem must be broadly recognized by all actors. That means all of you and all the people you know in your social networks. 2, we need to understand local natural resource conditions, and by that I mean, weeds that have developed resistance are part of the natural resource environment, amongst other things, right? It's now part of the environment. It's there. It ain't going back in Pandora's box. Recognize that farm households are heterogeneous. This is something I probably spend more time on in interdisciplinary groups in agriculture than anything else. Everybody wants to assume that, they talk about our farmers who are so many acres, so many this, and I tell them any community I go into, I know I can find a diverse array of farmers, some of whom are women, some of whom are men, some of whom are minorities, some of whom are white, some of whom are young, right? Some of whom have a lot of owned acres, some of whom rent. Okay? Farmers are not a homogeneous group, just like you guys aren't. Just because a lot of you are wearing white shirts doesn't mean you're homogeneous. Okay. And the complexity of governmental policies and business practices. Importance of social influences. Clearly, the responses of individual farmers are crucial, and I would emphasize, and it's kind of like me working with students. They're the ones who are taking all the risk by borrowing all the money to pay my salary. I need to recognize that. The farmers are taking the risk. They're the ones who could, lose the farm. Okay? I mean, I might still have my job. I mean, they're taking the risk, but we're all involved in it. Okay. Next question. Which of the following individuals do you think has the greatest influence on farm-level weed management decisions? 1, neighbors, family members. 2, crop consultants. 3, extension personnel. 4, the federal government. 5, financial advisors. 6, chemical seed company reps. 7, other. You got 10 seconds left. How am I doing on time? Good. Neighbors, family members, crops consultants, federal government, maybe not. Financial advisors, chemical seed reps. And of course, I'm sure if we discuss this more, maybe we will over the next 15 minutes, we could begin to think of the situations wherein, yes, it's the chemical seed company reps that are most important, or which part of the decision-making process, or when are neighbors and family members important, under what conditions, which situations, okay? But clearly all have a role to play. Conclusions, the challenge of understanding and responding to weed resistance, I guess from the perspective of a sociologist and an economist. The spread of weed resistance is global. Now, of course, we hadn't talked much in our group about outside the U.S., and today we are, so I guess it's safe to use global. But global means, in this sense, past the farm gate. Regional level, in a valley, in a state, in a country, and I guess now global. But factors influencing the spread are often local. How each individual farmer or other actors are actually practicing weed management. There's no magic bullet, okay? I know it's uncomfortable. And I've worked a lot in my career. I had an extension appointment for 20 years, and when people would say, but what's the answer? And I would say, well, it depends. Oh, they didn't like that at all. I mean, I'm a representative of a land-grant university. You should have the answer. And I tell them, but no, we have questions. Sorry. They don't like that. But we're going to have to fess up to it, right? Socioeconomic factors are as important as biophysical and climatological factors. And of course, they interact. Right? All the discussion about climate change. Or actually, I used to teach a course on natural resource sociology, and I used to ask students to define the difference between a man-made disaster and a natural disaster. A man-made disaster, natural disaster. So, is a hurricane a natural disaster or a man-made disaster? What would you say? Right? Sounds natural, right? Act of God. I mean, if your plane got grounded because of a hurricane, they wouldn't give you a free hotel room. Okay? Yet, depending on, for example, how people harvest trees, okay, in a particular environment, you may have a mudslide that wouldn't have occurred if people hadn't harvested trees. So is that natural? Is that man-made? Certainly not woman-made. It's usually the men who cut down all the trees. No, but it's, what is it? And it's not always clear. It's easy, so once again, it's nice to make a model and say natural, human, but it actually interacts. Whoops. All actors will need to partner with each other. We've talked about that. Okay. Call to action. This is something that the team was really emphasizing. We need to have our calls to action. So we need to develop a holistic, interdisciplinary HRM management approach with scientific and stakeholder inputs. It's not just about the science. Science is important. It's about a lot of things. We need to collect information from growers, farm managers, input suppliers, and others to identify their thoughts. And that's something I'm happy to say, working with Mike, Owen, and others, we've recently received a 3-year project. Is that what it is, Mike? Three-year project to begin collecting this kind of information. So we're going to get there. Assess the potential for neighbor community institution building to address common pool problems associated with HRM. And that's all I have.